I called the wedding off 2 minutes after my father stopped being invisible to that room. My name is Calvin Doyle, I'm 41, and I've been to exactly one wedding I almost ruined. Mine. I left before they cut the cake, before the toasts wrapped up, before anyone could pretend the night had gone the way it was supposed to. I remember the chill coming off the lake through the tent flaps, 320 guests, white linens, a string trio doing something quiet near the bar. My father stood maybe 10 feet from me in a navy suit that didn't quite fit through the shoulders. A suit my mother had steamed in the hotel bathroom that morning because the iron at home was broken and nobody had gotten around to replacing it. And then I heard 4 words spoken into a live microphone in front of every person who mattered to my family. Something in me went very still. I wasn't angry. Not yet. That's the part I want to talk about. Because what I did next cost me the life I thought I was building. And what happened after gave me back something I didn't know I'd lost. Before I get into it, if you're new here, take a second, hit like, subscribe, if this is your kind of story. Drop your city and the time where you're watching from. I read every comment, everyone. Now let me take you back to the second Saturday in September. The morning of the day I almost made the worst decision of my life. I grew up outside Barrie, Ontario, in a bungalow my father built himself in stages over about 6 years, paying cash as he went so he'd never owe a bank anything. Nothing about the house turned heads. Aluminum siding, a carport instead of a garage, a vegetable patch out back that fed half the street some summers. My father, Walter Doyle, ran a small fleet of snowplow trucks in the winter and did landscaping contracts in the summer, and he smelled like diesel and cut grass depending on the season. He wasn't a talker. He wore the same brown Carhartt jacket for I don't know how many winters, drove a 14 F-150 with 240,000 kilometers on it, and read the Barrie Examiner cover to cover every morning at the kitchen table with the radio on low, tuned to the farm report out of habit more than need. We weren't poor. The bills got paid. I went to a decent public high school, played junior hockey 2 seasons before deciding I liked university better. When I asked for something unreasonable, my father would look at me over the top of the paper and say nothing, which was its own kind of answer. There's a moment I've turned over a lot since everything happened. I was maybe 16. Somebody from the township had invited him to some kind of regional business dinner, an awards thing at a hotel banquet room in Aurelia, the sort of event where men put on ties to feel important. He looked at the invitation, set it on the counter by the toaster, and said, "I don't go in for that stuff anymore, son." That was it. No explanation. I didn't push. There was also a locked metal filing cabinet in the corner of the garage, gray scuffed at the corners. I noticed it 100 times growing up. Never once saw it open. I used to think he was just a private man. I was wrong about that. I met Claudine Sauve at a continuing ed real estate course in Toronto 4 years back. She was sharp, asked questions nobody else thought to ask, laughed at the right moments, and had this way of taking something complicated and finding the simple shape underneath it. I liked her fast. I'd liked her for months before I said anything. We dated 9 months before I brought her up to Barrie. It went fine. My mom fussed over her, made her tea, sent her home with a jar of pickles. My dad shook her hand, asked her 2 questions about her work, then went back to his paper. Claudine told me later she found him standoffish. I told her that was just how he was. Then she took me home to meet hers. Her family lived in Oakville, in one of those neighborhoods with triple garages and a landscaping crew that came every Thursday, whether the lawn needed it or not. Her father, Gerald Marchetti, was in commercial development, strip malls, mixed-use towers, that kind of thing. Her mother, Pauline, ran the house, and as far as I could tell, most of Gerald's social calendar too. The first time Pauline met my father was at a dinner I'd rather forget. He drove up in the F-150. Claudine's eyes landed on the truck for half a second. Not a long look, nothing she'd ever admit to. Then she smiled at me. I filed that away and kept walking. 18 months into dating, I proposed. We set the wedding for the following September. Somewhere in that stretch, I turned down a senior project manager role in Calgary. Better pay, bigger scope, the kind of job I'd been working toward for years. I stayed because Claudine was in Toronto, and I didn't want to ask her to choose. She never asked me to stay. She also never told me to go. I told myself it was a decision I was making freely. I hadn't figured out yet that it was a test. The Marchetti house was the kind of place that made you sit up straighter. Vaulted ceilings, framed photos arranged on the wall, in a way that looked casual, but clearly wasn't. A kitchen island big enough to land a Cessna on. Pauline had set the table with real candles for what was supposed to be a low-key Tuesday dinner. I clocked it right away. Low-key dinners don't need candlelight. Pauline started in with the questions before the bread even came out. What firm did I work for? How long had I been there? What did the growth track look like? She wasn't hostile about any of it. Her voice stayed warm, her smile never slipped. But the questions had a shape, like a form you fill out to see if you qualify for something. Gerald mostly talked about wine, had opinions on what we were drinking, pointed out the label, didn't ask me a single thing about myself. About 20 minutes in, Pauline steered the conversation toward family, asked about my parents. I said my mom did the books for a couple of small contractors part-time. Then she asked about my dad. I said he was semi-retired. Retired from what, she asked. He had a business, I told her. A short pause. She picked up her wine glass. I see, she said. 2 words, perfectly polite. And everyone at that table understood exactly what she meant by them. Trevor, Claudine's older brother, 36. Broad-shouldered, the kind of handshake that comes with a business card attached, caught my eye and gave me a small smile. The kind people give you when they want you to know they're in on something you're not. Claudine changed the subject, mentioned a restaurant she'd been to. The conversation moved on. I let it move on. That was my first mistake. It didn't stop after that dinner. Over the next several months, Pauline developed a real talent for the small public cut. At a birthday party for one of Claudine's friends, she introduced my parents to someone she knew. And this is Calvin's parents, Walter and Linda. Very down-to-earth, salt-of-the-earth people. She said it like a compliment. It wasn't one. Gerald was worse, in a different way. He didn't bother dressing it up. At a backyard barbecue at their place in late July, a group of men were standing around the grill talking shop, and I heard him say, loud enough to carry, Claudine's always been independent. She picked a hard worker. Wasn't exactly what we pictured, but... And he let the sentence sit there. The men around him nodded along. I didn't say anything that afternoon, but that night I sat Claudine down at her kitchen table and told her straight. If your family keeps talking about my dad like that, I need to know you'll say something. Not for me, for him. She looked at me across the table, careful, not defensive, not dismissive. The kind of careful you get when someone already knows the answer but isn't ready to say it out loud. I'll handle it, she said. I want to be clear about something. I didn't stay because I'm a pushover. I stayed because I'd watched my father go 30-some years without asking anybody for anything, and the least I could do was try to build something real with the woman I loved before deciding it couldn't work. I gave her a fair shot, but I'd drawn a line. I just hadn't said it out loud yet. I should have. The shower was about 30 people, a Saturday afternoon at the Marchetti house. Catered food, flowers everywhere, the whole production. My parents came because that's what family does. My father wore his sport coat and slacks, shoes polished. He stood near my mother at the edge of the room and watched the whole thing the way he watched the evening news, patient, taking it in, unbothered. Pauline found him inside the first 10 minutes. Walter, she said, loud enough for the cluster of women nearby to hear, do you need a ride home later? We could arrange something. She said it with a wide smile, the kind that came preloaded with its own explanation. She was being helpful. She was being thoughtful. Wasn't she being generous? My father looked at her for a moment. I'm good, Pauline, he said. Appreciate the thought. That was it. No edge in his voice, no change in his face. He didn't explain he'd driven himself. Didn't mention the truck. He just answered and let the silence after it do whatever it was going to do. Pauline blinked once and turned away. I could see, even from across the room, that his calm had bothered her more than an argument would have. Later that afternoon I noticed a man I didn't recognize. Mid-50s, well-dressed, one of Gerald's business contacts, looking at my father from across the room. Not a hostile look. More like someone trying to place a face he'd seen before. He pulled out his phone, seemed to think better of it, put it away. On the drive home I asked my dad if he'd noticed what Pauline had done. They don't know me, son, he said. That's their problem, not mine. I didn't fully understand what he meant. Not yet. A week before the wedding I went to pick Claudine up at her parents' place. Let myself in the side door. She'd given me a key months before. Heard voices from the kitchen. The door was half open. I wasn't trying to listen. But voices carry, Pauline's. You could still call this off. Trevor mentioned that the Hargrove boy asked about you again. Old Oakville money, you know that. A pause, Claudine. Mom, the wedding's in a week, Pauline. Exactly, there's still time. I stood in the hallway for a few seconds. Then I went back out the side door and sat in my car. Here's what I knew about that family she mentioned. Old Oakville real estate money, the kind Pauline had clearly been angling toward for years. I'd heard the name once or twice in passing. A son who'd gone to Western, now ran part of his father's portfolio. Never thought much of it before. I sat in that car for 20 minutes, ran through everything, what I'd heard, what it meant, what I was going to do about it, and then I made the worst call of the whole year. I went back in, knocked, and pretended I'd just arrived. I want to be honest about why I did that. I wasn't scared of a fight. I stayed because I needed to know if Claudine was in on it, or if she was just trying to manage her mother. I figured I'd find out at the wedding itself. Figured I'd see, in the moment that mattered, which way she'd lean. I gave her one more week's benefit of the doubt. I should have known by then. Some answers don't need more proof. The rehearsal dinner was at a place in Yorkville. White tablecloths, low light, the kind of restaurant where the menu doesn't list prices. Because the people eating there don't ask. Pauline had picked it, mentioned twice in the first 20 minutes, and once more after the appetizers, that she and Gerald were covering the bill. My parents arrived on time. My dad wore his good suit, charcoal, double-breasted, the one he kept in a dry cleaning bag at the back of the closet. He looked good. Better than good, honestly. Like a man who didn't need to dress up for anyone but had bothered anyway. Gerald greeted them near the door. Looked at my dad, nodded once, shook my mother's hand. Not my father's, just a nod. My mom noticed. I watched her eyes flick to my father's face, checking. His expression didn't change. Halfway through dinner, Pauline stood to say a few words. Thanked the venue, thanked the guests, said sweet things about Claudine. Then she turned slightly toward the end of the table, where my parents sat, and said, with a warm smile doing a lot of heavy lifting, "And we're so glad Calvin's family could be here. Walter, it's wonderful you made the trip." Like he'd traveled from somewhere difficult, like his presence required acknowledgement the way a generous donation would. Under the table, my mother found my hand, held it a second. I didn't look over. My dad picked up his fork and kept eating. Before I keep going, if you've ever sat at a table and felt like someone you love was being talked about instead of talked to, I want to hear it. Drop it in the comments below. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. This story's got a way to go, and you won't want to miss what's coming. Pauline pulled me aside near the coat check at the end of the night, looked at me with a practiced expression of concern. "I just want to make sure tomorrow goes smoothly for everyone," she said. "Your father might feel a bit out of his depth with the kind of guests we'll have. Maybe just keep an eye if you can." I looked at her for a moment. "My father has never embarrassed anyone in his life," I said. She smiled. "Of course." I didn't sleep that night. Lay on top of the hotel covers staring at the ceiling, trying to work out if I was doing the right thing. Not the wedding specifically. Everything. The way I'd let things stretch out this long. The way I kept drawing lines in my head and then pushing them back every time someone got close. At 1 a.m, I called my dad. He picked up on the second ring. "Still up?" he said. "Figured you would be. Just checking in." "Yeah," I said. We didn't talk about anything important for a few minutes. He asked if the hotel room was decent. I said it was fine. Then I asked him the thing I'd been carrying all day. "You good with all this?" A pause. I could hear the TV on low in his room down the hall. Some nature program. Something about water. "I'm fine, son," he said. "They're not kind to you." "No," he said. "They're not." "And that doesn't bother you?" Not really a question. He answered it anyway. "People show you who they are," he said. "I've seen enough of that not to let it get to me." I didn't have anything to say to that. Before he hung up, he said something I've turned over a lot since. "Whatever happens tomorrow, you don't owe anybody your dignity. Remember that." I said goodnight. Lay there another hour in the dark, replaying his words. He'd said whatever happens, not whatever they say, like he'd already planned for something. But I told myself he was just being a father. I was wrong about that too. My dad and I shared a room, a suite the hotel had set aside for the groom's family. He was already up when I came out of the bedroom, standing at the bathroom mirror, knotting his tie. Rented suit, white shirt, the same polished shoes from the shower. He looked completely at ease, no shake in his hands, same face he always wore, open, unhurried, like he was waiting for something he already knew was coming. "You good, Dad?" I asked. "Always," he said. He caught my eye in the mirror as I fixed my own knot. "You love her?" he asked. "Yeah, then do what you need to do today, not what anybody else needs you to do." I didn't know what to do with that sentence, just nodded. My phone buzzed. Trevor Marchetti. "Heads up, Mom wants your dad seated in the back. Less visible." Her words. "Figured you should know." I read it twice. Trevor had sent it the particular way some people do, not to help you, but to watch what you do with it. To be part of what happened next without any of the responsibility. I put the phone back in my jacket pocket without answering. My dad was at the window looking down at the parking lot. He reached into the inside pocket of his vest and pulled something out. A plain white envelope, legal size, soft at the corners from handling. He looked at it a moment, not long, folded it once, and put it back. "Ready?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. We went downstairs. I never asked about the envelope. Wish I had earlier. The grand ballroom at the lakeside venue held 320 people, and that day it held exactly that. White chairs in long rows, floral arrangements taller than me, a string quartet near the entrance. The kind of room that makes everything feel formal before anything's even happened. I found out where they'd seated my parents when I walked in with the wedding party. 9th row, left side, half blocked by a marble column. From that angle you could see the altar, but nobody looking from the altar could easily see you. The Marchettis sat front row. I stood at the altar and looked at that column, and something in me went quiet. Not rage. Something calmer. The feeling you get when you've been telling yourself a story about a person and suddenly realize the story was never true. The ceremony started, the quartet played, Claudine came down the aisle on Gerald's arm looking beautiful, and I kept my face exactly where it was supposed to be. During the ring exchange, Gerald leaned toward Pauline and said something. Quiet, but not quiet enough. 2 women in the second row glanced at each other. I caught one word, blue collar. Pauline smiled and then I saw him again. That man from the shower. I'd learn later his name was Lyle Forsyth, though I didn't have a name for him yet. He was seated near the stage with a group of Gerald's business associates. Looked at my father, really looked. The way you look at someone you're trying to place. Pulled out his phone, held it a second like he was deciding something. Put it away again. He'd already made his decision. Just didn't know what it was yet. The reception got going the way these things do. The room filled with noise, glasses went up, the band shifted from ceremony music into something with more swing. 320 people talking at once creates a kind of pressure in a room, presses against your chest. My parents found their table. I watched my father pull out my mother's chair. She sat. He smoothed his jacket and sat beside her. 2 people at a table of strangers, perfectly composed. Pauline went first, stepped up to the mic near the head table, spoke for about 6 minutes. Talked about the Marchetti family, their history in Oakville, their values, what Claudine meant to them. She was good at it. Her voice carried weight. People listened. She didn't mention my parents once. Walter and Linda Doyle, the groom's parents, didn't exist within Pauline's 6 minutes. Gerald followed with something shorter. Said Calvin was a hard worker. Said the family was thrilled to welcome me in. He said hard worker, the way some men do, not as a compliment, as a category, the way you'd describe something useful that doesn't require much further thought. Polite applause. I stood to take the mic and say something simple, thank everyone, move things along. Pauline didn't step back. "Oh, we're not quite done yet," she said, not letting go of the mic. Her smile hadn't changed. She was looking at someone near the back of the room. I followed her eyes. She was looking at my father's table. I had seen that smile before. In the kitchen doorway, at the rehearsal dinner. She wore it when she'd already decided something, and it had just arrived on schedule. I went very still. The band stopped. Maybe someone signaled them, or maybe they just felt the shift in the room. Either way, the music cut, and the silence after it had weight. Pauline turned slightly toward my father's table, held the mic the way you hold something you've carried for years. "I want to say something about the Doyle family," she began. Her voice was warm, reflective. The voice of someone giving a toast at a charity gala. "Calvin comes from humble roots, and I'm sure his father, Walter, did the best he could for him." She paused, let it land, then turned to the woman beside her, one of her country club friends she'd met maybe twice, and whose name I never quite caught, and said still into the mic, voice unchanged, "That's not a father. That's just trash that showed up." Some people laughed, short reflexive sounds. A good part of the room went quiet, the particular silence of 320 people deciding what to do with something they'd just heard. I turned to Claudine. She was staring at the table. Then, as if she felt my eyes on her, she looked up. Our eyes met for half a second, and at the corner of her mouth something small and involuntary. Just a flicker, a smile. She looked away from me immediately. I looked at my father. He hadn't moved, hands flat on the table, his face, I don't have a word for it that isn't too small. He looked like a man who'd decided, long before this moment, that other people's cruelty wasn't something that required a response. My mother had a cloth napkin pressed to her mouth. I pushed my chair back and stood. 320 people watched me cross the room. Nobody said a word. The room had that taut feeling, where everyone can sense something's happening, but nobody knows which way it's going to break yet. I walked over to where Pauline stood. She was still holding the mic. I held my hand out and she gave it to me. Not because she wanted to, but because the inertia of the moment made it the only logical thing to do. I turned to face the room. I want to thank everyone for being here today, I said. I mean that. A pause, long enough to have its own shape. But I am not going to stand here and let someone talk about my father that way. Not in front of 300 people. Not anywhere. I turned to Claudine. She was gripping the edge of the table. I asked you once what you'd do if they ever crossed that line. You told me you'd handle it. Calvin, don't. You smiled, Claudine. She didn't answer. This wedding's over. I set the mic down on the table beside me. Didn't drop it. Didn't throw it. Set it. The way you put something down when you're finished using it. Then I did the hardest thing in that whole room. I didn't say anything else. No explanation, no argument, no attempt to make Pauline understand. Because Pauline was never going to understand, and I was done spending my time on that. Somebody near the back said something quiet. A chair scraped. One of the bridesmaids made a small, sharp sound. I wasn't angry. I was clear. Those are different things. Took me years to understand the difference, and it turned out to matter more than anything else that happened in that room. Gerald stood up from his seat. You can't do this. Pointed a finger at me. The gesture of a man who spent his life telling people what to do. Do you have any idea what this is? Sit down. No, I said. Calm, even. He didn't sit. Pauline stepped forward, still holding it together, barely. Calvin, you're making a scene. Sit down and let's talk about this. There's nothing to talk about. I turned. My father was standing. He'd gotten up without any fuss. No dramatic chair push, no announcement. Just standing, jacket straight, face calm. My mom had a hand on his arm. I looked at him across the room. He looked back. Let's go, Dad. He held my gaze a moment, then nodded, once simply. The way he nodded when something was decided and didn't need further discussion. He came around the table, past Pauline without looking at her. Not with contempt. There was just nothing there that required his attention. We headed for the exit. My mother followed, holding her small purse, the napkin still in her other hand. 320 people watched us leave. The room started getting its rhythm back, chairs turning, voices low and urgent, people leaning into each other. In the middle of it, Pauline Marchetti stood near the head table, holding a mic that wasn't hers anymore, and a room she no longer controlled. I didn't look back at her. Near the stage, at a table with Gerald's business associates, Lyle Forsythe stood up. Watched my father pass. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The hallway outside the ballroom was carpeted and quiet. The sounds of the reception came through muffled behind the double doors. We stood near the elevator bank, my father, my mother, me, waiting in that particular silence of people who've just walked out of somewhere and haven't decided what comes next. My mother spoke first, said my name, just my name. I know, I said. The elevator button stayed lit. I watched the number above the doors count down. Excuse me. The voice came from behind us. Quick footsteps on the carpet. We turned, the man from the ballroom, the one who'd been watching my father. He was a little out of breath, like he'd hurried out after us. Walter Doyle? My father turned, looked at the man for half a second, the way he looked at everything, taking it in without reacting. Lyle, he said. They knew each other. Lyle Forsythe stopped a few feet away. Glanced at me, then back at my father. I'm sorry to bring this up here. I didn't want to say anything in there, but I've sat on the advisory board for your funds for going on 5 years. Didn't put it together that you... He paused. Didn't know your son was getting married. Didn't connect it until tonight. My father said, This is my son. Lyle turned to me, put his hand out. Lyle Forsythe. I run Cumberland Growth Partners. Your father is our largest silent partner. We're talking north of 400 million in assets under his structure. I shook his hand, not sure what my face was doing. What? I said. My father was watching me. There were things you never needed to know, son, he said, until now. We moved down the hall away from the elevators to a small seating area by a window. My mother sat, my father stood. Lyle Forsythe apologized and excused himself a minute later. Said he had my father's number, said he'd follow up. Then it was just the three of us. My father told me everything. He'd started a fleet and freight logistics business back in 1989, 2 years before I was born. Built it out of one truck and a rented yard outside Barrie. Ran it quietly for almost 30 years. No press, no industry awards on the wall. He didn't want any of that. In 2018, he sold the company to a private equity group for a number he said out loud exactly once. Because you're my son and you've got a right to know it. $1.1 billion. After that, nothing changed. Not the house, not the truck, not the paper. I wanted you to have a real life, he said. Not a life of handouts. I wanted to know you'd make decisions based on who you are, not what I've got. I sat with that a moment. Why didn't you ever? I started. He cut in before I finished, because the answer was always going to be the same. You didn't need it to be who you are. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, the envelope I'd seen him holding that morning, and set it on the cushion beside me. That's a property transfer I had drawn up last month. A portion in your name. Was meant to be a wedding gift. I didn't open it. Just looked at it. He said, "You walked out of that room for me. That's worth more than anything in that envelope." Behind us, through the ballroom doors, I could hear the low hum of 320 voices starting to understand what they'd just watched. Lyle Forsyth went back into the ballroom. He wasn't trying to start anything. He had a client at one of the tables, and he wasn't the type to make a scene. But he also wasn't the type to sit on something like that when the right person asked. The right person asked within 5 minutes. Businessmen in the same room tend to know each other, or know of each other, and the name Walter Doyle, if you knew where to look, was tied to a 2018 transaction that had made the trade press at the time. 15 minutes after Lyle walked back through those doors, 2 people had already looked the name up on their phones. Within 20 minutes, the information was moving table to table the quiet, deliberate way important information moves between people who understand what it means. Gerald's phone buzzed. He looked at it. A message from someone who'd been at the same table as Lyle. 6 words. Do you know who his father is? Gerald stared at the screen, searched the name. The first result was a piece from a freight industry newsletter. In 2018, Doyle Fleet and Logistics had been sold for over $1 billion in one of the largest private acquisitions in the sector's history that year. He turned to Pauline, showed her the screen without saying anything. She took the phone, read it, looked up, set it back down on the table. Around them, the room kept making noise. People at other tables were trying to piece it together, leaning in to listen. The particular electric hum of a crowd realizing the story they'd been watching wasn't the one they thought. Pauline Marchetti stayed completely still. Her hands were on the table. Both were shaking slightly. Trevor saw it from 2 seats away, looked at the screen, said quietly, "Mom." She didn't answer him. Claudine found me in the hallway about 30 minutes later. My parents had gone up to their room by then. I was still sitting in the seating area by the window, jacket off, looking at nothing in particular. She'd been crying. Her makeup had held up, everything done for the wedding still in place, but her eyes were red and she kept fussing with the sleeve of her dress. She sat across from me. "I didn't know she was going to say that," she said. "I believe you." She looked up. "I didn't set it up, I didn't. It wasn't something I planned." "Claudine," I said steady. "You smiled. I was nervous. It was a reflex. I wasn't. I know, and I did know. I'd been turning it over for the 40 minutes since it happened, and I knew exactly what kind of smile it was. Not cruel, not deliberate. Just the smile of someone relieved that a pressure had finally broken, even if the way it broke was ugly. That was the part I couldn't get past. "I asked you about this months ago. I told you exactly what I needed. You looked me in the eye and promised you'd handle it, and when it mattered, you looked at the table and smiled." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "My mother had something going with the Hargrove family. It's not that I wasn't going to go through with it, but she kept, I know that too." She went still. "I heard them talking," I said, "a week ago, in the kitchen." The hallway was quiet around us. Far off, through the walls, you could hear a wedding winding down in a way nobody had planned. "I don't think you're a bad person," I told her. "I think you're someone who's always going to choose her family when it counts. And I can't build a life with someone who looks at my father the way yours does." She didn't argue. That, more than anything, told me what I needed to know. "Take care of yourself, Claudine." I picked up my jacket and headed for the elevator. My father's phone rang at 9:40 that night. He looked at the screen, then set it face up on the small hotel desk so I could see who it was. Pauline Marchetti. He let it ring twice. Then he picked up, "Mr. Doyle." Her voice was different, slower. The warmth that used to wrap around everything she said was gone, and underneath it was just a woman who'd done the math and landed on a number she didn't like. I think there may have been a misunderstanding tonight." "There's no misunderstanding, Pauline. My dad's voice. Calm, not cold, just finished. You said what you meant. If I'd known that's exactly the problem. He ended the call, set the phone down on the desk, looked at it a moment, then walked to the window and stood with his hands in his pockets, looking out at the lights along the lakeshore. Office towers, condo buildings, all lit up against the dark. I was sitting on the edge of one of the beds, still in my dress shirt. I watched him. He wasn't enjoying it. Nothing in his posture read like satisfaction. He just stood there like a man who'd already said what needed saying and had no interest in saying anything more. After a while, he turned around. "You okay?" he asked. "Getting there," I said. He nodded, found the remote, turned on the TV, flipped channels until he landed on some kind of fishing program, sat down in the chair by the window. We didn't talk much after that. Just sat there together, TV low, the city outside going about its business. That was enough. In the weeks that followed, things happened to the Marchetti family that I only connected later. Gerald had a commercial development deal pending with Cumberland Growth Partners, a mixed-use project west end of Oakville, financing in the neighborhood of $3 million. He'd been working it for close to 4 months. After the wedding, the emails stopped getting answered. Not declined, not denied, just no response. Gerald's contact at the fund had been reassigned. The new contact was extremely polite and extremely hard to reach. The deal went into a review process with no defined end date. Pauline sat on the advisory board for a regional arts foundation, the kind where your name in the program means something. That fall she was asked, without much explanation, to step down. The foundation's largest anonymous donor had quietly raised concerns about the direction of the advisory structure. Nobody told Pauline who the donor was. Trevor lost a referral relationship he'd had for 2 years, a family that had bought and sold property through him reliably, who suddenly moved to another agent. He never found out why. None of them ever knew for certain whether any of it connected back to my father. That's the thing about Walter Doyle. He didn't do anything showy. Things just flowed the way rivers do because of what's upstream, not because of anything visible on the surface. What I know is this: my father didn't plan any of it, didn't set out to ruin anybody. He was just a man who existed in certain rooms, and those rooms carried weight. Sometimes that's enough. 3 weeks after the wedding that didn't happen, I called the company in Calgary. The role was still open. The hiring manager said he'd hoped I'd reach back out. I told him I was interested. He said they could have an offer to me by end of week. I thanked him and hung up. I drove up to Barrie that weekend and told my parents over dinner. My mom made shepherd's pie, the thing she only cooks when she figures somebody needs comfort food. My dad listened to the whole thing and then said, "Should have taken it 2 years ago." I laughed. First time I'd laughed in 3 weeks. Felt something settle back into place slowly. After dinner, I sat at the kitchen table while my mom washed dishes and my dad read the paper. Same table I grew up at, same kitchen. The curtain over the sink still the same one from when I was 12. I watched my father's hands on the newspaper. Big hands, the kind that look like they've done real labor, even though the work he'd actually done for most of his life had been in boardrooms and conference calls. He'd built something real and never once felt the need to tell anybody about it. Not me, not the neighbors, not the people at the shower who saw a rented suit and decided they knew what it meant. I thought about that for a long time. Before I get to what happened after, I want to ask you something real. Have you ever had to choose between the person you were building a life with and the person who raised you? Because I was at that exact crossroads, and I didn't always know which way I'd lean. Tell me in the comments. And if you've stuck with this story the whole way through, thank you. I mean that. I moved to Calgary in November. Took one suitcase and the envelope my father had given me, which I still hadn't opened. Calgary in late fall is dry and bright and surprisingly easy to disappear into. I liked that about it. Needed a stretch of time where nobody knew the story. Found a place in the Beltline, small good morning light, walking distance to the office. Bought a coffee maker, set it on the counter, went back to work. The new job was harder than the old one, which turned out to be exactly what I needed. My dad flew out in February, told me he was coming, didn't ask. Just said he'd be there on the 14th and asked if the airport was easy to get to from where I lived. I told him it was. He said good. Showed up in the same clothes he always wore. Work jacket, good boots. Looked around my apartment, gave a small nod, said, "Good light." That afternoon we walked along the river path, south toward the bridges. It was cold and the sky was that flat winter blue, and the river ran that pale gray color it gets that time of year. We walked mostly in silence, the comfortable kind, the kind you earn. At some point I asked him about what he'd been carrying since September. Why'd you never tell me any of this? He took a few more steps before answering. Didn't seem to be searching for the words, just gave the answer the space it needed. Wanted to see who you'd turn into without it. And? I asked. He looked at me. I'm proud of you, he said. 3 words. Said plainly, no ceremony, the way he did everything. I didn't say anything back. Didn't need to. We kept walking. The river moved alongside us. The city carried on overhead. There's something I've thought about a lot in the months since. Not the dramatic parts, not the ballroom, not Pauline's face, not the quiet phone call to my dad's hotel room. Something smaller. That kitchen curtain back in Barrie. The same one I used to stare at as a kid while I ate breakfast. Faded a little where the sun hit it. My father could have bought 10,000 kitchen curtains. Could have changed the truck, the house, the furniture. He had the means to do it twice over, and never once thought about it. He wasn't faking modesty. He wasn't hiding from anything. At some point, he just decided the life he wanted to live didn't require any of that, and he lived it completely, without ever looking back to see if anyone approved. I think about what I got wrong in those 2 years with Claudine. Loving her? That was real, and I'm not ashamed of it. The mistake was staying past the point where the picture was already clear. I kept giving her the benefit of the doubt, because I wanted the story to land a certain way. That's on me, and I own it. What I didn't get wrong was that table in the ballroom. I wasn't wrong the moment I stood up and said what I said. People have told me my whole life, without quite meaning to, that there are things you don't trade away, not for comfort, not for convenience, not to keep the peace at a table full of people who'd already decided what you were worth. The man who taught me that was sitting in the 9th row, behind a marble column, in a rented suit and shoes he'd polished himself. He was the most valuable person in that room. He always had been. People ask sometimes if I regret how it happened, the moment, the room, the 320 people. I don't. Not because of what I learned about my father afterward, not because of the envelope, or Lyle Forsyth, or whatever quietly happened to Gerald's deal in the months that followed. Those things are part of the story, but they're not the reason. The reason is simpler. My father was 10 feet from me when someone called him trash into a live microphone, and the only question in that moment was, what kind of man am I? I gave the answer I could live with. Everything else came after. I opened the envelope in my apartment in Calgary sometime in March. I won't tell you the number, but I sat with it a while, then folded it back and set it on the desk. Went and made myself a coffee. Stood at the window looking down at the street. My dad called that night. Asked if I'd opened it yet. I told him I had. Asked what I thought. I told him it was a lot to take in. He told me it was mine to do with whatever I wanted. Then he told me about a fishing show he'd watched the night before. That's Walter Doyle. That's him. I don't know what happened to Claudine. Heard secondhand the Hargrove arrangement never went anywhere. I wish her well. I mean that sincerely. As for me, I've got a good job, a small place with good light, and a father I call every few days who still reads a newspaper made of actual paper. That's the whole story. Have you ever had to choose dignity over comfort? Or watch someone you love get dismissed by people who had no idea who they were really dealing with? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this one stayed with you, share it. Somebody out there needs to hear it today.